Imagine this. The king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley himself, a man who had millions of adoring fans screaming his name, who could have nearly any woman he wanted, found himself desperately in love with one woman, and that woman told him no. Not just not now, not just maybe later. She rejected him completely. That woman was Hollywood starlet Debra Paget. And today, at the age of 92, she finally revealed the heartbreaking truth about why she turned down Elvis Presley, the man every woman of the 1950s dreamed of marrying. This story isn't just about romance. It's about fame, faith, heartbreak, and the choices that echo through decades. So grab a seat, because for the next hour, we're diving deep into one of the most unforgettable Hollywood stories ever told, the day Elvis Presley proposed love and was denied, setting the stage, America in the 1950s. The 1950s were a time of transformation in America. The war was over, the economy was booming, and a new wave of culture was sweeping the nation. Rock and roll had exploded into existence, and leading the charge was a young man from Tupelo, Mississippi, Elvis Presley. By the age of 21, Elvis wasn't just a singer. He was a cultural revolution. His concerts caused hysteria, his television appearances stirred controversy, and his music bridged racial divides in ways no one had seen before. But while the public saw a confident, unstoppable superstar, behind the scenes, Elvis was still searching for something. Or rather, someone. He wanted stability. He wanted true love. He wanted a woman who could see past the fame and love the man, not the legend. And then he saw her, who was Debra Paget. Debra Paget was one of the brightest young actresses of the 1950s. Born in Denver, Colorado in 1933, she grew up in a family that valued tradition and faith. By her teenage years, she was already on her way to Hollywood, quickly gaining roles in major films. Her beauty was undeniable. With delicate features, luminous eyes, and a quiet elegance, she captivated audiences in films like Broken Arrow, 1950, and Demetrius and the Gladiators, 1954. Later, she would stun the world in Cecil B. DeMille's epic The Ten Commandments, 1956. But Debra was not like the stereotypical Hollywood starlet. While many actresses embraced the glamorous lifestyle, parties, affairs, scandals, Debra was grounded in her Christian faith. She was soft-spoken, modest, and serious about her values, and maybe that's what caught Elvis's heart. Elvis meets Debra. The first time Elvis laid eyes on Debra Paget, he was reportedly speechless. "She's the most beautiful girl I've ever seen," he told his friends. Elvis was captivated. To him, Debra wasn't just another Hollywood actress. She was the woman of his dreams. Beautiful, talented, and untouchable. And Elvis, being Elvis, didn't waste time. He pursued her relentlessly. The courtship flowers, phone calls, invitations to concerts and dinners. Elvis turned on his Southern charm and gave Debra his full attention. Friends of the star later recalled that Elvis was serious about Debra. This wasn't just another fling. Debra admitted years later that Elvis was kind, respectful, and attentive. She enjoyed his company. He was polite and in many ways still a shy young man beneath all the fame. But while Elvis's heart was falling fast, Debra saw something else in him. Something that made her hesitate. Elvis's world was spinning, fast. Fame, constant travel, screaming fans, endless temptations. His life was chaotic, restless, and exhausting. And Debra was the opposite. Where Elvis sought adventure, Debra valued stability. Where Elvis was impulsive, Debra was cautious. And where Elvis lived for the stage, Debra longed for peace and a quiet, faith-centered life. And so, when Elvis took the ultimate step, asking Debra to marry him, her answer shocked him. No. Elvis's heartbreak. For a man like Elvis Presley, who could charm millions, rejection was rare. And rejection from the woman he adored? It cut deep. Friends say Elvis was devastated. He confided that Debra was the only woman he had ever truly wanted to marry at that point. Her rejection shook him, and some argue that it changed the way he approached love for the rest of his life. Debra's refusal wasn't out of cruelty. It wasn't because she didn't care for Elvis. She respected him. She admired him. But deep down, she knew they wanted different things, and she knew Elvis's lifestyle, the fame, the pressure, the temptations, would ultimately clash with her values and her faith. Why Debra said no, in her own words. For decades, Debra Paget stayed quiet about her decision. She never publicly discussed why she turned down the king of rock and roll, but now, at age 92, Debra has finally spoken openly about it. In a rare interview, she revealed the truth. Elvis was a wonderful man. He was kind to me, and I truly respected him, but our lives were moving in completely different directions. My faith was the foundation of everything I did, and I couldn't see myself living the life that came with being Mrs. Presley. It wasn't the life God wanted for me. Her voice was steady, but her words were powerful. She had chosen her values over fame, her faith over fortune. And while Elvis was heartbroken, Debra remained firm in her decision, the shock of rejection. For Elvis Presley, being told no wasn't just rare, it was almost unthinkable. He was at the height of his fame, adored by millions, with women lining up just to be near him. And yet the one woman he truly wanted. Said no friends later described Elvis as restless after Debra's rejection. He would sit quietly for long stretches, strumming his guitar, lost in thought. To his inner circle, he confessed that Debra Paget was the only woman he had ever seriously considered marrying at that point in his life. It wasn't just about romance, it was about his dream of finding stability in a chaotic world. He longed for someone who could anchor him, who could see the man, not the superstar. And for a brief, shining moment, he believed Debra could be that person. When she said no, Elvis was left adrift. Elvis's restless heart. After Debra, Elvis threw himself even deeper into his career. His concerts became more electrifying, his movies more ambitious, his music more daring. To the world, it looked like Elvis was unstoppable, but privately he carried the wound. Friends noticed he seemed more reckless in his relationships afterward, more eager for attention, more easily hurt when things didn't work out. Some argue that Debra's rejection shaped his entire romantic path, that it planted a seed of insecurity, a fear that even with all the fame and fortune in the world, he might never truly be loved for who he was. Debra's side of the story. For Debra, rejecting Elvis wasn't easy either. In fact, she later admitted that she felt torn. She admired Elvis deeply. She saw his kindness, his gentleness, the way he cared for people close to him. But she also saw the chaos swirling around his life. The constant travel, the screaming fans, the temptations waiting at every corner. And she knew herself. She knew that wasn't the life she wanted. Her Christian faith was central to every decision she made. Debra's family had raised her to value modesty, integrity, and devotion to God above all else. To marry Elvis would have meant stepping into a world where those values would constantly be tested, perhaps even shattered. So she said no. Not because she didn't care for him, but because she cared for her own soul more. Elvis and his mother, a crucial connection. It's important to remember just how close Elvis was to his mother, Gladys Presley. She was his rock, his anchor, the one person he could always count on to love him unconditionally. When Elvis told his mother about Debra, she reportedly encouraged him, seeing how much he admired the young actress. But when Debra rejected him, Gladys was heartbroken for her son. She knew how deeply he had hoped this relationship might bring him the stability he longed for. In many ways, Elvis's devotion to his mother filled the gap left by Debra. But just a short time later, when Gladys passed away in 1958, Elvis was devastated beyond words. The combined heartbreak of losing both the woman he wanted to marry and then his mother left scars that would never fully heal. Elvis's later relationships. After Debra Paget, Elvis would go on to date and even fall in love again. There was Anita Wood, there was Priscilla Beaulieu, and later Linda Thompson and Ginger Alden. But those close to him noticed a pattern. Elvis sought women who were young, impressionable, and less likely to challenge him. Some suggest this stemmed from Debra's rejection. Elvis had reached out to a strong, independent woman who knew what she wanted in life And when she refused him, he turned instead toward women he felt he could guide or protect. It wasn't malicious. In fact, Elvis genuinely cared for the women in his life. But the ghost of Debra Paget lingered, shaping the way he approached love forever. Debra's path forward. While Elvis spiraled deeper into fame, Debra chose a quieter path. She continued acting through the 1950s and 1960s, appearing in major films and building a reputation as one of Hollywood's most talented actresses. Her most iconic role came in The 10 Commandments, where she played Lelia, the water girl. That film remains one of the most watched in history, cementing her place in Hollywood legend. But eventually, Debra stepped away from the spotlight. She married, divorced, and later married again. Her final husband, Ling Si-kung, was a Chinese-American oil executive and the grandson of the famous Chinese reformer Confucius. After marrying him, Debra retired from Hollywood completely, dedicating her life to her faith and her family. She never sought scandal. She never courted publicity. And for decades, she never breathed a word about Elvis Presley. Elvis's decline. As the years passed, Elvis's career reached dizzying heights. But so did his struggles. The pressures of fame, the demands of touring, and the loneliness of superstardom began to take their toll. Prescription medications became a way for him to cope. His health began to decline. And though he remained beloved by millions, the private Elvis was increasingly troubled, increasingly isolated. Some who knew him best believed that Elvis never fully healed from those early heartbreaks. Debra Paget's rejection, followed by his mother's death, left him searching for comfort in ways that couldn't last. Why speak now? For years, Debra Paget stayed silent. She never exploited her past with Elvis for fame or fortune. She never wrote a tell-all book, never gave scandalous interviews. But now, at age 92, Debra has spoken openly about it. In a recent interview, she explained why she turned him down and why she has no regrets. Elvis was kind. He was respectful. But I knew my faith would not allow me to live in that world. I prayed about it, and I knew the answer had to be no. It was one of the hardest decisions I ever made because I did admire him. But God had a different plan for me. Her words are calm, but they carry the weight of a lifetime. She chose her values over fame, her faith over fortune. And even though the world might not understand, Debra has lived in peace with that choice. Elvis's legacy in her eyes. Debra doesn't speak bitterly of Elvis. In fact, she honors his memory. She recalls his gentleness, his humor, his deep love for his mother, and his genuine kindness to her. He was a wonderful man, but he was surrounded by so much that wasn't wonderful. I don't think he ever found the peace he was looking for. Those words are haunting, because we know how Elvis's story ended, too soon. At just 42 years old, the what-if question fans often wonder, what if Debra had said yes? Would Elvis's life have been different? Would her faith and stability have anchored him, saved him from the chaos that consumed him? Or would the pressures of fame have overwhelmed their marriage no matter how much she tried? We'll never know. But what we do know is this. Elvis Presley's love for Debra Paget was real. Her rejection was real. And the impact of that choice rippled through his life in ways no one could have imagined. Debra's final word. At 92, Debra Paget is not a bitter woman. She is serene, grateful, and full of wisdom. Looking back, she says, I don't regret it. I believe in God's will, and I believe Elvis is at peace now. That's all that matters. Her story isn't just about rejecting Elvis Presley. It's about staying true to yourself, your values, and your faith, even when the whole world would have understood if you chose differently. Closing to audience. And maybe that's why this story still touches us today. Because in a world obsessed with fame, fortune, and glamour, Debra Paget reminds us that sometimes the most powerful choice is the one that protects your soul. If you've watched this far, thank you for being part of this journey through history, love, and faith. Elvis Presley's story is unforgettable, but so is Debra Paget's. Before you go, make sure to subscribe. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers, and every single one of you helps keep these stories alive. Hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves Elvis, And let's keep the legacy of the king and those who shaped his story alive together. Because in the end, Elvis Presley may have been the king of rock and roll, but Debra Paget was the woman who reminded him, and all of us, that even kings can be told no. Now, for those of you still here, our most dedicated fans, I want to share something special, something you won't hear in the usual Elvis documentaries or Hollywood stories. This is the untold impact of Debra Paget on Elvis Presley's later life. And believe me, once you hear it, you'll never look at Elvis's journey the same way again. The ghost of what could have been. Every person carries one defining heartbreak. For Elvis Presley, many believe it was Debra Paget. You see, Elvis didn't just admire Debra's beauty, he admired her spirit. She was strong, rooted, unshakable in her values. She wasn't blinded by fame, and that's exactly what Elvis craved. So when she said no, it wasn't just rejection. It was the loss of what Elvis thought could be his safe haven from the madness of stardom. Even years later, people in his circle noticed that he would bring up Debra's name. Not often, not publicly, but in private when reflecting on his younger years. It was as if he always wondered, what if she had said yes? His relationships after Debra. Look closely at the women Elvis dated after Debra, and you'll see a pattern. Priscilla Beaulieu was just 14 when Elvis met her. Young, innocent, moldable. Anita Wood was devoted but lived in Elvis's shadow. Linda Thompson gave him comfort. But their relationship lacked stability. It was as though Elvis had been searching for someone who could be both a partner and a guide, yet after Debra, he stopped looking for equals. Instead, he sought those who wouldn't challenge him the way she did. Some of his friends even admitted that Debra set a bar Elvis never found again. Faith versus fame. Debra's rejection was rooted in faith. And ironically, faith was something Elvis himself deeply cared about. Elvis loved gospel music. He would often gather his friends late at night at Graceland and sing hymns until dawn. In those moments, he wasn't the king. He was just a boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, pouring out his soul. Imagine if he had married Debra, someone who would have encouraged that side of him, nurtured it, protected it. Could it have changed his story? Could it have saved him from the darker roads he eventually walked? We'll never know, but the thought lingers, doesn't it? The psychological impact. Psychologists who study celebrity culture often point out that early heartbreak shapes later choices in profound ways. For Elvis, Debra's no may have planted a quiet but powerful insecurity, the fear that he could never truly be loved as just Elvis, the man. It's why he surrounded himself with the Memphis Mafia, men who would never leave him. It's why he showered girlfriends with gifts, houses, even cars. He wanted to be sure they stayed. Because one time, the time that mattered most, someone walked away. Debra's influence on his music. Did you know some Elvis fans believe certain songs carry echoes of Debra Paget? Listen to his tender ballads, songs like Can't Help Falling in Love or Love Me Tender. There's a vulnerability in those lyrics, a longing for something pure, something just out of reach. While Elvis never admitted it publicly, many close to him believed Debra was the silent muse behind his softer songs, not the fiery passion of fleeting romances, but the deep ache of the one who got away. Debra's silence. Elvis's myth. Interestingly, Debra's silence may have actually magnified Elvis's legend. Think about it. She could have written a book, sold interviews, exposed private details. But she didn't. She let Elvis's image remain untarnished, his memory unblemished. In her own way, by protecting her story, Debra preserved the myth of Elvis Presley. And perhaps that's why decades later their brief connection still captivates us. Elvis's last days, was she still on his mind? By the mid-1970s, Elvis was struggling, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Some friends recalled moments where he would reflect on the early days of fame, almost wistful for the innocence of it all. And occasionally Debra's name surfaced, never bitterly, always gently. It's as if she represented a fork in the road he never took, a vision of the life that might have been. Debra at 92, the final reflection. And now, hearing Debra herself, at 92 years old, acknowledge Elvis with grace and love gives us closure, too. She doesn't regret her choice. She believes God had a different path for her, and yet she remembers Elvis with warmth, with respect, with kindness, and maybe that's the most haunting truth of all. That Elvis Presley, adored by millions, still carried in his heart the quiet absence of the one woman who told him no. Closing words for fans. If you've stayed with me until this very moment, you are a true fan, not just of Elvis Presley, but of the human stories that shaped him. Stories like Debra Paget's remind us that even the brightest stars carry private scars, that even kings are vulnerable to heartbreak, and that sometimes the people who walk away leave the deepest marks of all. So if you're still here, thank you. You are the heartbeat of this channel, the reason we can keep telling these stories. Please subscribe if you haven't yet. Help us reach that milestone of 1,000 subscribers. Share this with a fellow Elvis fan who deserves to hear the real story, because Elvis Presley may have been unforgettable. But so too was Debra Paget, the woman whose choice changed the king forever.